Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. And my guest today is, well, what I've read about you, you've been called the hottest designer of Norway, Birger Berge. Welcome to my channel.
Thank you very much. Delightful to be here.
Thank you. How did that happen? How did you become the hottest designer of Norway? What was that?
Well, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Everything just happened kind of organically, I guess I would say. I just started in 2016 with my with a new Instagram account. I had just had a breakup, so I was trying to figure out like new things to do, and I'd always been doing knitting. And sort of, but never really my own designs anyway, just kind of doing designs or doing like knitting patterns here and there and just making adjustments on those patterns. So I would maybe I would like knit something a bit longer, or maybe I would make it a little bit bigger or smaller, or just change like the shape of something when I needed to or wanted to. And then I just gradually started adapting more and more and started posting about it. And then, so the first like design thing I got was like, there was this indie knitting magazine in Norway that had a post that they wanted people to send in some design submissions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just sent in this small little like gauge swatch anyway. And didn't really have a big plan for it or anything. And then they wrote me back and they said, oh, we did like that, we really want this. And I had suggested I would make a cardigan, which I did. And then when they wanted the design to publish the design, I obviously panicked a bit because I hadn't been doing those kind of like, big design things as of yet. So I just needed to learn all of the calculations and like sort of, and so within a really short period of time I started doing more design properly.
Right.
And then I gained some more followers after that, after it was published in that magazine. And then I just kept on posting like pictures of what I made on my Instagram, and sort of the numbers of followers just increased steadily but slowly. And then after a while I started getting more some media attention. So I was interviewed by a local radio station, because I'm from rural part of Norway, and they asked me to come over there and do a radio chat. And they were like asking me, oh, what do you want to do with all of this knitting? Why do you do it? What is your vision, sort of?
Right.
And then I said, oh, it might be fun to make a book. And then the day after, several publishers called me and gave me offers of publishing a book. And then the snowball just started rolling more and more. That's after
amazing. That's an amazing story. Well, let's go back to your childhood. Basically, Norway has this amazing history of knitting culture. What was your family like? Were they very crafty?
Yes, indeed. I've always been surrounded by people who like to use their hands and crafting and making things. Like, especially, of course, my mom and my aunts and my grandmother, they would always be, sewing or knitting or crocheting or doing embroideries or whatever. And I was always very different from my brothers in many ways. They were more like outdoorsy, I would guess, and more, outgoing in a way. I would just like creep up to my mom and like watching what is she doing, what is she making, and trying to see if I could make something similar. So I would always have like tiny little projects going on, even if it was just, I used to make these tiny dolls that I would make clothing for, and I would try to knit and I would try to crochet. So like I remember learning knitting from a very young age, and I don't really remember not knowing like the basic knit stitch. That is something I've always been able to do. And then it's just, gradually as you grow up, you want to try to do more complicated things.
Right. Was there like ever any time when you didn't knit?
No, I've always been doing it, and I've always been wanting to do it in a way, and I've always been curious about it, and always just wanting to learn more about it. So of course in Norway, as you say, we have a big knitting culture here, so we're very lucky in that regard. And so we also learn some of it, at least in school.
Right.
So I was always sort of ahead of schedule there, because I knew how to, when we were going to knit a sock, I knew how to knit a sock. But of course, this is not something that will make you popular in a way in school. This is something, you know, a lot of people taunted me for that, and just thought it was.
Is there like in general this stigma that men shouldn't be knitting in Norway, or because it's such a like long going back culture, it's totally acceptable?
Well, I guess it's changed quite a lot, like in the recent years, because knitting has had a big, you know, surge of popularity and has become more and more usual in all of the whole population in a way. Of course, there are still less men who knit than women, but I guess there's less of a stigma attached to it now, because in the 90s it was more seen as something that maybe elderly women would do, and or maybe it was just some kind of like special interest in a way. So I think that the internet and Instagram and Ravelry and YouTube has changed a lot of this. So it's more available and it's more visible, of course. So when I was young, people would just be like, you know, this is just something for old ladies. And also you can see that if you go into a knitting store today in Norway, it's more modern, it's more approachable. Like even way into the 2000s, it was a bit more like maybe, you know, it was a down period for knitting anyway. So it was more conservative, and it was more not as a big choice in, you know, patterns or fibers or knitting needles. So I think it's just becoming more and more diverse in general.
Right. So like all the interviews I've read where you participated or articles about you, they say that even though you love the historical Norwegian designs, you modernize them. How do you modernize them? Like, what's your approach to make it more modern?
But I like to sort of, you know, put them on maybe, you know, garments that are smaller often, because it's easier for people to knit than maybe like, you know, a all over pattern sweater. But I also try to knit like this one, for instance, which is similar to a lot of, you know, traditional designs, but it's done with a raglan seam, and it's done, you know, it's more tight fitting than a lot of the older garments would be. So I always try to sort of update it, because I want it to, usually if I'm starting to make a new design, I will usually just lay out like something that I bought and I like the shape of, and I try to take the measurements and I try to sort of adapt it to knitwear, which can then be designed and knitted up. So I always try to make it feel not like a museum piece, but something that you want to wear, and that would look not, you know, it will look not off in a modern wardrobe, but it will you know, fit into it. But this is something that always interested me, because if you look at like, you know, a knitting pattern from the 80s, they will be, you know, very like 80s shaped. So I think this has always been a part of knitting for a long time, because of course, if you see the 80s, you know, the arms are huge and the shoulders, and there are often even shoulder pads. So it's always very interesting to see how knitting changes with times, and yeah.
And that's one of your passions. You like history, right?
Yes.
So
I do love.
I mean, is that history in general or history of knitting in particular?
Well, I've done an MA in history at the University of Berge, but it's not knitting related. But I think that history is one of the most interesting subjects, because of course history shapes us, shapes who we are today in many ways, and it's always good to have an eye on history. I think to be able to, you know, see why we're like this in our society today, or try to understand like the long developing lines of history, and of course it makes you interested in, because I have a lot of books on also knitting history. So it's interesting to see how people often perceive it to be a women's pursuit, but in the olden days, a lot of men knitted too out of necessity. So of course, this whole thing changed when sort of people gained more spare time and did things more for leisure, than men did not do it anymore. And maybe especially like in the 50s, when of course you had a different economic system, and a lot of the time the men would be at work and would not be knitting, and it would be seen as something unmasculine. But now it has been more, we're more equal today than we were in many earlier decades. And then I think that the stigma of knitting will, disappear. Then it will be as normal for men to do it as women, I think.
Right. Well, when you design something, so there is like traditional Norwegian designs, like just the motifs, right, that have been repeated through generations. You can see them in mittens, you can see them in sweaters and all different garments. Do you use those and just modernize the look of the garment, or do you try to modify the motifs as well?
I usually try to modify them. I will always start out by like drafting a chart with I have this moleskin book with that I can sort of scribble down the pattern. So I usually start like that, and then I try to see how they place in relation to each other, and try to sort of because of course all the traditional patterns, they are they're there and they are available, like inheritance in a way from the tradition. Right. But there's always something small you want to change, and maybe I want to harmonize it a bit, or maybe I want to put it into a different context, maybe from this, for instance, I saw this sort of a pattern that looked like this on a sock, an old sock, and then I've seen things that are other socks that I've adapted into a knitted hat or into a scarf, or so it's always like that, trying to see a pattern and then trying to imagine, which garment could this be in, or how could I combine it with other things, or which colors could I use. So it's always interesting to see. And we have a lot of these books in Norway with old traditional pattern charts that you can look at and you can get inspiration from. But I always try to do so for instance, I made now a design for a Swedish firm called Wearable, where I wanted to make like sort of because you always have like this these Scandinavian stars, and I wanted to make like a snowflake effect in a way. So I wanted it to go from like these bold stars and then to sort of like smaller and smaller patterns to make this sort of like make it look like sort of snowy or fading gradually, which wasn't I don't think that was a very like traditional design touch in Norway from olden days. But then this is just an association that I've made from these snowflakes or stars, and then I wanted to create this snowy effect in a way. So that's how you can work with those traditional designs.
Right. Well, I was interviewing Hazel Tyndall, and I asked her how she swatches for like her new designs, and she said, I never really swatch, I just make a hat. Like that's her way of swatching. And I read somewhere that you said something similar. Like, is that your approach also, like to make something smaller, some small item instead of a swatching?
That is absolutely correct, yes, because I really hate swatching. But also you sort of need to do it because, of course, if you need to design a bigger garment, you have to have like the measurements correctly. Otherwise, it can turn out totally different from what you envisioned or what you wanted to do. So yes, I often do a hat, for instance, because I enjoy making them, and then you can also test like the color and the yarn. So like this sweater here, for instance, I started with a hat in the exact same pattern and the exact same colors, and then I could see how it worked out, how my gauge was, and how I really enjoy the colors, and yes, I did. And then I could start on a bigger garment, because of course, if you have bought or gotten wool for a new project, and you think that, but this color wasn't really something, and then you have started a sweater and maybe you have knitted like a big piece of the body, and then you're like, oh, this is not right. But if you have a garment, I think it's much easier for me to see that, okay, this color works for me. Yes, I can do this. Yes, this pattern here looks good like this. I want to do it like this. So of course, and that you won't be seeing. I don't think I do swatch sometimes, even though I don't really like it. And then, but it's sort of more difficult to see, I think, from a flat piece of fabric because maybe I want to wear it. I want to look at it. I often actually look at it in a mirror, because if I just see the garment itself and hold it like this, it's a bit more difficult. But if I have a hat and I put it on and I can see it in a mirror and from a distance, then it's easier for me to sort of make a
Right.
judgment that, okay, I'm happy with this, with the way this turned out.
So, okay, so when you do the design, right? So let's say you have a sweater that you want to design, but you have the little motif that you want to try and you do a hat. Will you publish the hat as well?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. It depends, but usually I will post them, yes, and I will maybe have them in a book or have them in something else. So yes, they become a part of, because also they're a part of the design process, and they're a design in themselves. So and it's always more challenging or more fun, I think, to design smaller garments. That's what I enjoy the most. I think they're fun to make, inspiring to make, and especially like, you know, socks or mittens, I really like to create.
Right. I saw one pair of socks that you did, and it had, besides all the motifs on the round, it also had that line going all the way down on the bottom of the foot, and it was like so funky and like interesting and eye-catching. And I was like, oh, I never seen anything like that before. How do you come up with those ideas?
Well, I just, you know, sometimes you just, because if you have knitted a sock socks a few times, you think like, and you try to make, you know, you make the heel gusset, and you try, and then you see how sort of then you work out the shape, and you see how you knit it. And then I just, you know, came to thinking that, okay, because this is, you know, this is a very stripy sock. And I just thought, oh, it would be so cool if this just continued under the sock, and, you know, made a statement like that. And so that's just how so then I tried to adapt it, you know, and try to make sure that, okay, this stripe here is going to be on the back of, in the middle of the heel. So I need to do like this, and need to do like that, and then just knit it like that. And then my publisher, because this was in one of my books, they just took this really cool picture where sort of the feet was lifted a bit, so you could see it like running under the heel. So that was a very good effect. So those are in fact one of my most favorite socks that I've made. Yeah. Wow. So I'm glad you liked them.
They were like probably the first thing that I saw that like caught my attention immediately, and I was like, this is so cool. I never seen anything like this. And wow. It's really a nice picture, actually. Like you're right. It's like it shows the angle that like really showcases like how cool it is that it continues all the way down. Well, what gives you the inspirations? Like, how do you come up with the ideas in general? Like, do you see them in your dream when you're sleeping? Do you think of them in the shower? Do you go on a walk and you see something in nature? Like, where those ideas come from?
You know, it's kind of weird, because if sometimes you have to, you know, I have some, you know, a design submission, for instance, and then I go and I think about it, and I'm like stressing, and I'm like, oh, what I'm gonna, and then I try, and then it doesn't really work out. So then, but all of a sudden, if I'm actually, you know, working out, or I'm like in the forest, or I'm at work, and all of a sudden this idea just comes crashing down in my mind. So it's very, it just happens, I guess. So I'm not very like, you know, I think some people are better at being creative when they need to, like they can sit down and they create something, you know, okay, I'm gonna create, this is it. But for me, it's just it can just happen anywhere. So I will usually I will either write it down on my phone, or try to, like, you know, draw a picture in a book very quickly or something like that, just to preserve the idea. And then I go and start making, you know, the charts, and try to modify it a bit, and try to, you know, start doing all the thinking colors, picking out the yarn. So it's a very unpredictable process, I would say. And sometimes, you know, I'm full of ideas, and other periods I'm just like totally out of ideas. So it's very, I'm always very impressed by people who can just, you know, they seem to pull new designs out of the hat constantly. And I'm like, you know, some periods, yes. And some periods I'm just like, you know, I just want to knit something very simple, or something very repetitive in a way. And also sometimes I do circulate things, like I can think, you know, that this and this pattern, I like to work on that. So I wanted to create it into something else. So I did actually, you know, like this sweater, for instance. So I also made like this huge blanket, which is basically the same pattern, but just in a blanket form. And then also I made like a big like statement pillow with very thick yarn.
That's gorgeous.
So this is how I work, sort of like trying to, you know, resurface old ideas maybe, or just sometimes something completely new. So
well, let's talk about colors. So for me, the most difficult thing about Fair Isle or stranded color work is to pick the colors that's gonna work together. Like I can knit pretty much anything I have instructions for, but like the picking of the colors, it's always somehow a torturing process for me. And there are knitters out there, like, I mean, I was talking to Alison Randall, and she has this talent of taking like 13 different colors and color blending in that it looks almost like a painting, like almost like watercolor, right? Like one color blends into another. And I know that like there are some combinations that's been traditionally there for years, but you don't necessarily use the traditional colors all the time. Is that ever difficult for you to pick the colors to decide what's gonna showcase any particular design the best?
Oh yes, it's always a struggle, I think, because we're very lucky here to have like a very big yarn industry, and we have a lot of choices when it comes to wool and yarn. So it's always and some of the brands they have like I often use Rauma from Finull from Rauma, and they have this huge like color chart. It's just never ending. So you would have like maybe 10 different colors, shades of blue. You will have 10 different shades of white. You will have, it's just never ending. So then it's always a struggle to sort of, pick out exactly the right white color and the exactly white green. So I always struggle a lot with that. So I try to do all the like tricks in the books, like, holding the balls of yarn and taking a picture and doing a black and white photo so you can see the contrast clearly, or just try to, frog it and rip it up again a lot of times and unravel it and try with a new color just to see if I can get the color combination just right. So it's always a struggle, but I usually try to think a little bit and use like the color wheels and try to sort of okay, so this is the people that know things, they say that this will work, so I just try that. And then there's always you always have your favorite combinations. Like I really like this these kinds of combinations, like the white and the what's the color called in English? Light brown, maybe.
Right.
And I like blue and yellow combinations, and different always always the classic like gray and white. And so I try to, but sometimes I do try to try new things, but it's always a rocky road. I find that I'm very bad with green colors, for instance. I rarely use them. I don't really, and also not very good at using blue, because I often find that it's not, I start knitting and then I find it's sort of not right for me always. So some colors I struggle with, and I can see you have a wonderful purple shawl behind there. I never use purple really. I never really get it right.
This is probably like one of my first time using this color also. Like I'm usually like all about the blues, so purple is a little bit like going outside of my comfort zone.
It looks wonderful. It's like a wonderful shade. So yeah.
Well, is there like favorite yarn brands that you always go to, and do you try to support some like local brands? Do you have, what's your approach to buying yarn? Like, is there something more holistic about it, or you just go for the biggest variety out there?
Well, like I said, we have like, a quite big industry in Norway, and I sort of like to try to use those yarns. In my books, I've always used like the Norwegian brands, which is, of course, I think it's good to support like a industry that we have here, and we have a lot of good quality wool, and usually the animal welfare will be taken very well care of on Norwegian farms, where they sometimes at least source the wool. So I like to do that, and it's always, I'm a creature of habit anyway. So for me, I'm very used to using 100% wool yarns. So if I try my hands on, sometimes I've tried, alpaca, and sometimes I've tried merino. And then it's always sort of a struggle for me to get, to get even tension and to get the color work right, because I'm not that used to knitting with merino, for instance. Right. Of course, if I try with merino, it feels very, it's so soft, and so for me it's a bit difficult, because it's unusual for me anyway. So I have like two like main suppliers, maybe, as you can call it. I have Rauma, which is a Norwegian brand, and also Hillesvåg, which is another, which is even closer here in Norway. So they are both kind of local to the western part of Norway, and I really enjoy using them. And if you have some favorites, of course, it's easier to do like the color choices, or because then I know like these shades of red and shades of yellow, which they provide. And then it's also easy, because then I can think, okay, if I choose this yarn, I know the gauge there. So it's, it's easier, because then you can sort of calculate already a bit in your mind how many stitches you need to cast on, and how many, and you can just start sort of more spontaneously. So I'm most certainly a creature of habit.
Well, what's your yarn stash looks like? Do you buy yarn just because you like it and hope for inspiration in the future, or do you buy just for specific project?
Well, I usually try to buy for specific projects, but then, sometimes I just unravel them because I'm not, and then it just winds up in my stash. So I'm sort of like, I don't have like a very nice, you have a very nice stash behind you, I can see. But my stash, it's more like, I try to, I have them in cupboards or in boxes, so they're not, there all the time. So I don't really have a yarn wall, but maybe I want to get it eventually, I think, because
I mean, it's very inspiring just to walk by.
Yeah.
Those colors speak to you.
Yeah, so I need to do that a little bit more, I think, because sometimes you can also forget what you have if they're just hidden away, because then I go to, and I go and buy something new, and then I realize that, oh, but I have this in my stash already, so I can just use that. So then
well, so you mentioned that those book publishers called you and you jumped into writing a book. What was that process like? Was it difficult? Like, what was difficult? What was your least favorite part of that? What did you absolutely love? What was it for you?
Well, I found it very stressful because you don't really know what you're getting into, basically. So you have, of course, you have to fill a full book, and then you need to come up with all these patterns, and everything needs to be according to deadlines and everything. So it was very stressful in a way, but also, of course, a fun process. But just getting all the patterns right, and getting trying to get the inspiration to create enough patterns, because once you have a deadline, it's very stressful. Even though the deadline is far ahead, you're like, oh no, oh my God. That's the way, at least how I work, or how my mind works anyway. So, but it was also, it's a very, I found it a big honor to be writing a book. That was a big, both a bit daunting, but also I was like, wow, cool, I'm going to be writing a book, or I am writing a book, that is, I used to say. And so it was very inspiring and very, challenging, and you have all this, hope people will like it, hope people will buy it, hope everything. So it's been a very big thing, and a very and also when you suddenly see it in a bookstore, that's like, wow, this is me, look at that.
You have a lot of control over like what that book is gonna look like, how the picture is gonna look like who is gonna model them, or was that all decided for you?
They wanted to decide it for me first, but then of course I went over the deadline, and my publisher called me and they just said, okay, you need to get a photographer, you need to get some models, and then you need to get the pictures. So I asked some friends if they could model for me, and they said yes. And then I got a photographer, which I had worked with previously, or had worked in a book where I had a pattern from before. And then we just had these 2 fun days in Berge where we took all the pictures, and we had it was, so then I got a bit more, control over the process, because otherwise I think it would have been, I would have traveled over to Oslo probably, and they would have a setup, and then it would be less me maybe. So it was a good thing to extend the deadlines, I think, so I could get more control.
What was the reception of the book like? Were you surprised with how it sold?
Yes, it was very well received, and it sold a lot of copies. I was very honored that people wanted to buy the book, and to have it, and people wrote me a lot of very nice messages on Instagram, and so I was very it was awe-inspiring to, you know, to have the book out there and people bought it. And just to imagine that, you know, it's a very honoring thing to that people go by into the bookstore and they see your book and they choose to actually pick this book and take it with them home. So I was very, so every person that buys my book, I'm so honored and pleased that they do so, because, you know, it's a book, you know, it's a labor of love. So you know, you put a lot of effort and a lot of you in it. So it's very very touching anyway when people buy the books. I was very, very touched when it was well received.
Right. I see a lot of posts that you do that actually things that other people knitted that are your patterns, that you post their pictures on your Instagram. How does it feel when you see somebody actually knit one of your designs?
Well, that's the most wonderful thing, I think, when people choose to knit them and they put a lot of labor in it and they post it, and then so it's always fun to see how people, you know, maybe they do their own adjustments, maybe they pick a different color, maybe they you know, so it's always, that's the most fun thing, I guess, when people do that. I really love it when they knit my patterns. So it's always you know, such a great honor and such a great thing that they choose to do it. So I'm always like, when a picture comes up in my Instagram feed, I'm like, oh wow, yeah.
Are you ever surprised by their color choices and like, oh, I never thought about it, but I actually like yours better than mine?
It has happened, yes. Sometimes you see people making really, really nice versions. I'm like, oh, I should have thought of that. Or, you know, it's so some people are just really good at those things. So yes. And, you know, people always bring their sort of, that's exciting with knitting. I think that people bring their own skill set and their own color choices to your pattern. So I really, that's just wonderful to see all the variations that people make.
Well, when I looked first at your Instagram page, in the header, it says that you are a knitter who also enjoys the household chores. What kind of household chores do you enjoy?
Oh, anything. I just, you know, I really enjoy, like you can see here I have a lot of plants, for instance. So I have a lot of those things. I like to cook. I like to bake a lot. I like to make, you know, jams and preserves, and I like to clean. I like to organize. So, you know, I usually, if I go into YouTube, I will often be watching like homemaking videos and like tips on how to organize your sock drawer properly or things like that. So I really, really enjoy like anything like housey in a way. And I'm not a very I like to, I like my own company and I like to be in the house, and that's probably also why, I enjoy knitting, because I enjoy, I do not have the need to be around people all the time. So I'm very like a homey person in a way. So.
When you cook, do you approach it the same way you knit? Like, do you go for traditional Norwegian dishes, or do you like to experiment with like whatever you see on Instagram, influenced by all over the world?
I really do like to, Instagram and online recipes anyway. So lately I have been having a really like, I've been making a lot of Persian food because I got a new book with Persian recipes. So that was very wonderful, and a lot of spices and a lot of vegetables. And then I sometimes really like to make the very traditional Norwegian stuff. But it's very inspired by people I follow on Instagram, and especially more maybe in terms of baking. There's a lot of really nice cake blogs and like that I follow that really just make you tempted all the time to create a new cake or something like that.
Right. What would you consider like comfort food for yourself?
Oh, it would have to be something sweet. I'm more of a sweet tooth than a savory kind of guy. So maybe something with salted caramel or something like that, or
that's the color of the sweater, salted caramel.
Yeah.
Now we know what it's called.
It's important to match the garment with the sweets, right?
Do you have trouble taking pictures that will showcase your garments or your knitting like the best way? Like, is that the learning process on its own?
Well, yes, that's sort of I sort of missed like the early days of my Instagram account, because then everything was so so easy and just kind of like it wasn't that very much I didn't really consider things that much back then. I just posted and but when you have a book published, for instance, you get these really high quality photos and these nice angles and everything that is kind of hard to reproduce alone. So I guess I've sort of like have some level of anxiety of posting new pictures, because you always wanted to keep a high quality of things. So that's changed a bit. That I try to keep up the standards in a way, which can be difficult to do, especially if you try to take pictures yourself of some socks, for instance, which is very difficult. I think socks are the most difficult garment to photograph anyway, because it's which angle do you want to have, how do you do it, so that can be a challenge, I think. And then sometimes you can ask people to take pictures for you, or but yeah, it is a challenge to take pictures. And I think that there are so many talented people on Instagram that you can always compare yourself with people who take better pictures, so it's a never-ending kind of thing like that.
Well, do you get because we all talk about the benefits of knitting, how it helps you to relax, how it keeps your blood pressure down. And yet every time I'm talking to a designer, we're talking about the stress, the anxiety, the aggravation, the pressure of like what's next, how to come up with the next design, bigger and better things. How do you keep that balance for yourself?
Well, that's a challenge, of course. And I'm not a full-time designer. I work full-time at the University of Bergen, so I try to combine it with that. So I guess that is sort of a good thing to keep my sanity, I think, because if other designers, if they if that's how they make their living, I think it's a very big pressure to create something new, and you have to do it this month in order to have a salary next month in a way. So for me, that is not a thing I have, but it's always a challenge to, if you agree to make a new design, and then you have the deadline coming up, and then you need to make all the adjustments, and you need to think everything out, and you need to it's a big process behind a knitting pattern. And I think that people people want to pay as little as possible for as much detailed instructions as they can get. So that's always a very difficult thing in knitting, I think, because I don't think always that labor involved in making a pattern is appreciated enough in a way. So that's a stressful thing. And I think it's a trend also that knitting patterns become more and more complex, that people want to know more and more from the knitting pattern. So it's a very trying to because you always have to sort of step out of yourself and try to, okay, for people who try to knit this, how do I need to explain this? And that's often a very big challenge, I think.
How do you stop yourself from over explaining? Like, how do you decide what you're not going to explain?
Well, I think that's actually, I need to think the other way around, because I have a very simple, if I knit a pattern, I'm very I don't really, look that much at the pattern. I just, okay, I think this sort of, and then I can read some of it. And then, so I always need to think that, okay, but you have to over explain this. You need to really, embroider this out so it's understandable, because I will, if I just, make the pattern the way I would do it, it would just be like knit this. And then it would be
because the motif, use it and make a sweater.
Yeah, basically. So I always have to sort of okay, go into over explaining mode, and then just trying to make it as detailed as possible. So that's sort of my process. And then I can think okay, is there something more I can put in here? Okay, then I do it.
Right. Do you knit in public? Do you always bring your knitting everywhere you go?
Yes, especially if if I'm doing some if I'm on a train or on a flight or on a bus, I would always have knitting with me. And if I'm in a cafe or in a pub, or then I will pick up my knitting and start knitting. So I always do that anyway, and anywhere. So sometimes you get some stares, and sometimes you don't. And I think if I'm abroad, like in England or in the US, I get more people look more at what I'm doing. I think at least it seems so, because yeah. Here in Norway, every, just I think we have like one of the biggest like percentages of the population that knit. But other places, it's more uncommon to knit, and then it's always even more uncommon when a man knits. When people will be like, "Oh my God, no." Oh,
But do you think they look at you critically, or do you think it's just curiosity and like admiration of your skill?
I think curiosity, yes. And people think, I think a lot of people, if they don't knit, or if they haven't knitted in a while, I think they remember this, very struggling first knitting, like it's very, laborious. And then when people knit a lot, you just have the soft movement of the hands. And I think people are like, oh, wow, look at that, So I think I never think I haven't really been looked at in a offensive way, or although I have seen people, taking pictures, like they're like, oh, and then
Well,
I see that.
When I need that sweater later on.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan for like this whole year? Do you plan way far ahead?
No, I'm not very planner like that. I usually try to one of my main motivations is that I always want to have something, a project going on, because I want to be able to pick with me this and this project and be able to did on that anywhere I go. So I always have a project going on, and then I pick with it. But I'm not like a big I'm gonna make 5 sweaters or 5 hats or 5 socks. That's not me. So I will usually just pick up inspiration, and then all of a sudden I want to start a new project, and then I'm like, oh wow, these socks are going to turn out great. So yeah.
Well, since you're so good at housekeeping, they're like your set of advice of how to treat your knitwear, how to store it, how to wash it, how to take care of it so it lasts you longer.
Well, I think that first of all, you should never usually knitwear should be lying flat, at least sweaters and things like that, because otherwise they can lose their shape. So I like to have them in the top drawer so you can see them, and then they can be folded nicely and arranged so you can see them and enjoy them even when you're not wearing them. And then also, at least if you have like 100% wool sweater, you don't really have to wash it that often. You can just hang it up to air, and then it will cleanse itself, because wool is self-cleansing to some degree. Right. So, and it also absorbs like a lot of sweat and everything. So I think that if you avoid washing it too often, and if you just take good care of it like that, you will be having a garment that will last for years and years. And if you notice a small hole, fix it right away, because then you can fix it while it's still very small. Otherwise, it will be very big very soon. So always be sort of try to be ahead of the curve and try to fix these minor issues before they become a major issue, I would say. And also learn to repair things, and learn to darn your socks, for instance, because if you do, you can take care of them and they will last you for many, many years.
What do you usually do with everything you need? Do you keep it all for yourself? Do you gift it to people? Do you sell anything? Like, what happens to everything you've made?
Well, I don't like to sell them. So that's because, it's very difficult to sort of set a price for a hand-knitted sweater. It's very complicated and not very amusing to do. So I usually, if I have, I'm sometimes, I make a commission for a yarn label, and they will, they say, okay, knit this sweater in, size large and so and these measurements. And then I make it, and then they return it when they're finished photographing it. And then I often just start thinking of a person that I know, and oh, this will look great on, this guy, and this will look great on her, and this. And then I will usually gift it to them, because it's nice to see it worn, and they're usually not knitter themselves, so they really appreciate that gift. So I really enjoy giving them as gifts more than selling them. So that's usually what I do.
Who is in your eyes knit-worthy? Like, is there such a category for you that there are people who are knit-worthy and people who are not?
That I would knit a gift for?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. I like to, I've given some things, for my mother, for instance, she would always be knit-worthy, or my friends, they would be knit-worthy. But then again, if people, some people will always ask you, but you will really enjoy knitting. Why could you knit this for me? Then I'm more no. So it depends, I guess, on their, maybe a little bit their attitude towards knitting, and of course always their relations. So if they are close to me, I would love to knit for them. But otherwise, if people say like, "Oh, you love to knit me this," I'm like, no.
Knit me a dog sweater. So like, how somebody asked you about what you dream about, and you said that you dreamed to write a book, and then boom, the next day it happened. What are you dreaming about now?
Well, maybe I do want to make a new book, so I think that's going to happen somewhere down the line. And otherwise, I haven't been. I'm just kind of, happy just right now, and I hope that is basically always my goal, to be sort of happy in the moment. And if that's where I'm at, then I'm not a very ambitious or driven person anyway. I'm more like we'll see how things go. So if I can make a new book, that is great, and I think I will do so. So that's maybe one of my bigger knitting dreams right now.
How can people that watch this video help you to make your dreams come true?
Well, of course, if you get my book, I'm very happy about that. And if you're like, follow me on Instagram and give me some, if you make a comment, I really appreciate that. And if people say, give me notice when they like something, then I can, get inspired to make more of it. And, so just when people follow you and people invest in what you do, that's really like a huge motivation, and something that I really appreciate. So I love it when people give feedback. That's basically if they just press like, that's a wonderful compliment, I think, especially on Instagram, where things are so always changing in a way, like with the algorithms and with the everything. So every time people choose to just drop a like or drop a comment, I'm so wonderfully happy. So that's always a big motivating factor. And it's been quite a journey anyway, this whole Instagram thing, because I would never, if you had asked me in 2016, what will this account look like in 6 years, I would be like, oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll post some pictures now and then. And suddenly it became this huge thing. So I'm always very, mind blown anyway. So when people choose to follow and choose to just say hi or give a comment or anything, then I'm just so happy. So it's always a big boost for me. So when people choose to do that, I'm so very pleased and so very honored that they take a small, just a small portion of their time and spend it on me in a way. It's just a big honor. So that's a very big motivating factor.
It's fine. Like you mentioned that you have times when you don't have any ideas of what to do next, and you can feel down about that. Is that when those comments mean the most, when you see them and like suddenly you understand that people want to support you and people like what you're doing? Is that the thing that you need to like bring you back into the creative activities?
Yes, exactly. Because if I haven't posted in a while in Instagram, for instance, and all of a sudden some people tag me and they have made like a beautiful version of one of my sweater patterns, and that's a huge motivating factor. And a while ago, a lady in Canada, she had made a beautiful version of one of my socks, and she had made this really cool picture like in front of a huge Canadian mountain, and I was like wow. And I couldn't really believe the whole that my pattern was seen and it was knitted in Canada. I was totally mind blown. So that was a huge, I felt so good that day, and I was mind blown, and wow, look at this, it's on the other side of the planet and people are knitting this pattern. So that's a wonderful thing about Instagram and the knitting sort of community, because you can connect with people all over the planet. And also I get to have this conversation with you today, which is also very sort of so much fun, and so kind of weird to think that we're on different sides of the planet, but still connecting over knitting. So that's always a wonderful thing.
Right. No, it's such an international language knitting. Like it brings you together with the people you might never otherwise have met, So
yes, absolutely.
That's my favorite part about Instagram, that I get to meet like amazing people, creative people from all over the planet,
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Birger, for being my guest today. I really, really enjoyed our conversation and having you on my channel. And we're gonna put all the links to you, to your Instagram, to the book. So if people want to buy the book, or if they want to just say hello and drop that like under one of your posts, they can find you and do that.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. It's been such a great honor and such a fun little conversation we've had. I really appreciated that.
I enjoyed talking to you a lot. Thank you.